very formal.
Yes, it is,
Okay.
unlike me. So I think we should be good to go. Just to start, I'd like to just share a little bit about Sean and his background. Sean and I know each other for more years than I care to admit,
Yeah.
although I really value him as not only a great friend, but also someone who I admire professionally. He really was very fortunate when he started his career. Morgan Stanley hired him to be an individual contributor with the firm. Within just a few years, he was promoted to VP and then executive director. Before we knew it, he was managing a lot of people. After staying with Morgan Stanley for 11 years, he was hired by Citigroup for 9 years, where he had hundreds of direct reports reporting into him for their private bank, mostly in APAC and EMEA. And now Sean's at BlackRock, where they're very fortunate to have him leading global teams as the head of the Americas and the EMEA client distribution services team. So one of the many reasons I'm excited that Sean is here is he's a hiring manager. He gives performance reviews. He receives performance reviews. And what I thought could be interesting is, especially for Joanna Desicata, is that when someone's interviewing and you want to prepare them for interviewing, you want them to get the offer. So the way they communicate their executive presence and their emotional intelligence is very similar to when someone's going in for a performance review. It's about how they communicate and how they think, right?
Definitely agree.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I really appreciate the introduction. Sure. I think you just boosted my ego on a Friday afternoon, which is very much appreciated. I think we could all use that these days. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I think, I prepared maybe about 10 or 15 minutes worth of conversation specifically on the performance reviews, but it's a small group. I would like it to be questions. I'd like it to be conversational. Let's brainstorm. Let's talk through things. We all have experiences to share with each other. So I'll start for about 10 minutes with performance reviews, and I think that will facilitate the beginning of the conversation. Steve, do you want to share a screen on one pager we put together here?
Sure. Give me 1 second.
Okay. And while Steve is doing that, let me ask, who here is giving performance reviews to staff?
Nobody.
Okay, nobody. All right. Well, then maybe I won't spend too long on this then.
Right now.
Gupta, did you say you are? I thought he raised his hand that he is. You are?
As well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay, we got 2 more people that entered the waiting room. I just want to let them in, and then I'll share the screen.
All right. Well, then I'm shifting course. I'll spend less than 5 minutes on this, and then we'll go to something more relevant. But I think it starts the conversation basically, largely because I think leadership and promotion and receiving these things all comes down to a couple key concepts, in my opinion, at least in my experience, and a lot of that is just honesty and transparency, and the ability to connect with who you're talking to. So in the performance conversation, and I'll start there, and then we can go to hiring, then we can go to promotions and all those sorts of things, which are very similar. A couple of key things that I've noticed when you are talking to somebody and it's going to be a difficult conversation, or even if it's going to be a good conversation, the first thing you need to do is rehearse, right? Steve, can you go to slide 12, please?
Sure.
So we've had some really tough times in the financial services industry over the last year or two. Revenues are down, staffing is tight, there's been layoffs, there's been some tough performance conversations, and you don't walk into one of these conversations and wing it. You need to be prepared. You need to make sure that you are touching on the key points that you want to touch on. Still waiting for Steve to pull up slide 12. It's gonna
Yeah, I just had to admit
position your
someone.
performance review. Yeah.
I didn't hear that. I'll be out that day, Sean.
Clear feedback. Steve is too slow in pulling up slide 12.
Yeah,
You
I
proved
needed,
Efficiency.
I need some patience here, and my cursor is giving me a hard time.
Okay.
Okay, this is gonna show in your performance review, Steve.
There's no question. I'm taking notes.
Slide 12, here it is.
There you
Good
go.
job.
Thank you.
You're
So a couple
welcome.
quick things, and I think this applies to multiple things. One, did you skip this slide again? Yeah.
No, oh, did I? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
This the one?
Slide 12, Steve.
I got out of the view. Okay, here's slide 12.
Yeah, click on that, and then back away from the keyboard. Don't touch anything. All right, good. All right, so a couple quick things here. One, make sure that you are clear on what you want to get across in a conversation. Again, I can draw a parallel to an interview, a discussion about promotion. What is it that you want to emphasize? What is it that you're going to go to? Two, ask somebody to start. When you just dive into a conversation, you do not have their attention. You do not have their focus or the desire to listen to you. Ask them to start. We've all received performance reviews as well. Well, I've given a lot of them. What is it you're going to that you're nervous about it? You're thinking about what you're going to get across. You're thinking about the conversation. Sometimes if it's an interview or whatnot, you're thinking about it the night before. You're nervous. And so I'm asking you to give you their point of view, let you break the ice and let you begin to close, begin to have the conversation and make it more free flowing. And then if you're giving this review, listen and don't interrupt. That is key. People go in and they want to say, well, what about this? What about, let the person go. I mean, maybe not for 20 minutes, but let a person go for 5-10 minutes. How do they think their year went? It's really important. And then you tailor the rest of your conversation based upon that. And then
Sean,
provide.
can I interrupt you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. What's the difference when you're giving a performance review in the office compared to someone that works remotely?
So body language, right? Body language. There's subtleties here. So on the phone, you can't read someone's body language. You can't read their facial expressions to the point that you can when someone's in the office. Slumped shoulders, gripping a table, perspiration, things that you can see on someone who's not having a good time. And in the office, you are more inclined, particularly if it's a rougher conversation, to have somebody else with you, right? Because it can escalate quickly, right? It can become a negative situation. So if you're giving a tough review, there's no harm in having another person there, right? As long as you don't make the person feel ganged up on. Over the phone, it is a different conversation. There's more room for someone to gather themselves, turn the video off, excuse themselves for a second. Like you have more room to do that. In person, you do not have that option. So it's a tougher conversation, and reading the room. Those are some of the things that I've noticed, Dave.
Thanks for sharing that, because usually there are annual reviews, sometimes semi-annual reviews, and a lot of the times, I'm sure you coaching people, managing people in India and Singapore and Hong Kong and throughout Europe, the cultures are different.
The cultures
How
are
do you,
very,
how do you deal with that?
The cultures are very different, and I think as a leadership philosophy, you need to meet people where they are as opposed to expecting them to meet you where you are, right? So even in the United States, I have a team in Seattle, and I have teams in the Northeast. The difference between those cultures is huge. It is absolutely huge. Northeast, a little bit more snappity snap, right? If you got to get to the point, right? You'll lose people if you don't get to the point. You got to be more direct. You got to be more blunt. In Seattle, that is not the case. And I can tell you from experience, when I started running a team out there 8 to 10 years ago, I'm from Boston. I worked most of my life in New York, and a blunt style does not work. It very clearly turns people off. And there's a slower way of talking. There's a more indirect way of getting points across, and you need to adapt to that. If you're in front of a room of 20 people and you come in with your style, you will lose them. So it's more questions and what do you think, and how does that look for you? And there's a lot more of that that's going on for a performance review or a town hall or any of that. You have to adapt to the culture. The Geneva, Germany, those cultures, very like just the facts, and you better know your facts. And there's no rah-rah, and there's no like, just if you're talking about a system, you better know that system. And it doesn't matter how senior you are, a junior person will ask you the most intricate detail about how do I code this type thing. So it's a different conversation in different spots.
Boy,
In
any-
APAC, they won't speak no matter what you do. You can ask multiple times for feedback, and you're going to get blank stares. So you better have your self-confidence going that, that's not about you. So, yeah.
Very true.
Sean,
Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Can I ask a question? Sean, one thing that I have noticed, when it comes to in-person meetings and virtual meetings, right? During the virtual meeting, although in-person meeting has more challenges when it comes to feedback and all this kind of stuff, the virtual meeting has one thing that, this is a human touch, right?
Right.
You don't get to see the person's emotions,
Right.
the reaction to what you're saying, right? A lot of times these days we are hearing the glassy-eyed executives, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what we see in the virtual meetings, that lack of human touch. What do you think about that?
Oh, I could not agree more. And I think a performance review and interview, and actually this is advice. I know we have some recruiters here. You have to have that human touch, whether you're giving a review, whether you're receiving a review, whether you're interviewing, whether you're an interviewer, it's human touch, right? So in terms of our networking, I just had a lunch yesterday with a colleague I'm trying to get to know a little bit better. We spent the first 20 minutes talking about anything but work, anything but the industry. Is there a connection there, right? We talked about weather. We talked about the snow we've gotten here. We talked about kids. We talked about school districts. The human touch is everything, because you need people to know that you care, that you are not a robot, that you're not just reciting something, right? And again, I'm gonna say that message is true across the board. A junior candidate coming in that I'm interviewing, or a manager that's going to manage my teams, I am talking to them about life for the first 5 or 10 minutes, because I want to know, is this person able to make a connection with another human being? Is this person able to be flexible in their conversation? Or is this person have a list of notes and they're going to get to them right, no matter what the flow of the conversation is? So, your point and your question is spot on. In a room, in a conference room, in an office, there is that more human touch, and it is such a better conversation than over, Zoom. Now, that being said, that's not always a possibility. I'm not going to fly around the globe for every performance review. So you have to work harder, and you have to be more personal in the conversation to let people know that you are, again, not just reading your points, that you're listening to what they have to say, that you feel what they have to say, that you care about what they have to say.
So compensate the lack of physical presence with more communication, more heart-to-heart communication, padded with more compassion, all this kind of stuff, right? So that the other person doesn't feel like it is just a matter of, performance review. It is more about a discussion.
And drop the corporate speak, right? If you are, if you're in a review across, over Zoom, the more corporate speak you use, the more you are just a figurehead manager, as opposed to a human being talking to another human being.
Absolutely.
Let me jump in. Brett, you have a question?
A question slash point that builds on what Sean was just saying. I was meeting with a executive coaching client yesterday, and he's interviewing, and one of the things that he struggles with, and I reminded him of, is when you're meeting with, doesn't matter if you're meeting with an associate or the CEO, you're meeting with a person. And so whether, for in his case, it was an interview, and he said, well, I'm meeting with the CEO. How do I interview? And I said, be yourself, because at the end of the day, if you made it to interview with a CEO, or you made it to performance review, we know what your performance is. We know what your skills are, but we hire and promote and work with people that we want to be stuck in an elevator with, that we can have a conversation with. So I think we forget that being vulnerable as a leader is actually very powerful. That vulnerability, showing a bit of who you are versus I'm just a leader, I'm your manager, I'm a CEO, I'm whoever. So I'm just putting that out there. And Sean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think you nailed it. I think you said it really, really well. As a hiring manager, one of the first things that I'm looking for in an interview is that connection. I like the way you put it. I am going to spend a lot of time with this person, right? They don't have to be my best friend. We don't have to get, lunch every day together, but there has to be some ability to communicate on a professional level and some sort of a connection to say, I want to bring this person on as a part of my team. And the way to do that is to be a human being, right? To be natural and free flowing in the conversation. And it goes both ways. If I'm interviewing for a new role and I'm speaking to someone senior to me and they're just very robotic in the questions, I also have to ask the question, I'm going to be working for this person. Do they have the ability to relate to me as a human being? If I have to call them and say, hey, my son needs me to go to practice, what is the chance that that person is going to acknowledge and have empathy for your life outside of the work that you do? As a hiring manager, a lot of times the question it's certainly more nuanced than this, but what is this person going to do for me to make my life easier? Right? How does this person coming on board my team make my life better, make my group better? And some of that is the ability to interact with other people. As a manager, I can't tell you, I have so many people that are uber talented and they are just difficult to work with. And it's not worth it. It adds to your plate. It adds things that you have to do as a group manager to make sure that people are getting along. So I think you nailed it. I'm going to spend time with this person. Yeah.
Yeah. Brent, I think you can identify with this. And Joanna, you and I used to work together right after she left kindergarten. But when we're recruiters, we talk to people. One of the first questions during an interview is, tell me about yourself. And I think all of us have answered that question at one point or another in our lives. And when I speak with someone, if they just rattle off what's on their resume and they're nervous, it's okay to be nervous, but you're not your job. Joanna, what do you think of that?
Yes, I think, and I always say this because when I interview someone or if I prep someone for interviews, right? I always tell them that the problem with interviews is that if you create something, if you respond based on what you think the interviewer would want to hear, that's going to be a recipe for the disaster, right? Because it's like you never know how it's going to be. But if you speak from experience and then just talk about your personal experience, that's going to be so different. It's going to be a personal conversation. It's going to be a conversation that it's going to be so natural, right? Because I always say that because every time, and I would notice that every time I video someone, like, okay, so let's start all over again. So I don't want to hear what you want to think that I want to hear, but I want to see. Tell me about your daylight. Tell me about what you do as a project manager. Tell me about what you do as a software engineer, because all of a sudden, that whole thing changes. And all of a sudden you feel like their shoulders drop and then just say, okay, become more natural and say something more different. It just changes the whole thing. And I think a lot of, I'm speaking because I'm a recruiter, about the candidates that I talk to, they think, I have to be perfect and say the perfect things. But then again, that whole thing changes. And then the more that you don't win the job. So yeah, I was just, I think that's one of the things that I observe and I always hear from candidates.
You were always good at that.
Can I add something
Thank you
to
for
it?
sharing that. Yeah, sure.
And that was a great insight, Joanna. The one thing, because right now I'm also looking for jobs and, I'm going for many interviews.
Yeah.
One thing I realized, right, that yes, I can curate my response, like tell me about yourself, or it can come more naturally if I take pride in what I do. What defines me, right? I have been working in many things for many years, and there are things that makes me very proud about what I do, how I add value to the community, how I add value to the technology, to the business. Once we think about that, take a moment to think about that, you don't really have to try too hard to build an elevator speech. It comes very naturally.
Absolutely.
Things that we love to do, that we are proud about, right? And how it can add value to your organization.
I agree. And I always say to candidates, Your interview is your professional platform to brag about what you know and what you're really good at. And I'm like, the moment you tell them that, it changes. It's just like, oh yeah, that's true. Because I can tell you more and more about what I know and what I'm good at. And I think, don't be stuck with what the job description says. Obviously, you want to know what they want, but there's so many things outside of the job description they have that might be so important to whoever is interviewing you. And, I think that makes a huge difference to be as natural as possible.
Thank you.
Well, the majority of jobs that you're going to are not completely defined in scope. Right. And very few of them are an exact match to something that you've done before. Obviously, there has to be a skill set match. And you wouldn't be sitting in an interview if there wasn't some semblance of skill set match. You have X skill, you've done it at Y place, you're talking to Z employer. But the Z employer is going to have multiple roles usually, and they're going to have flexibility in that role. And if they're good at what they do, they're going to tailor that role to your strengths. So it is a matching of skill set, but it's also the passion about what you do. I really like the way that you put that. Showing the passion for what you do is something I can work with anytime. Steve, can I make a suggestion? Would you mind stopping sharing so we can see everyone's face?
If you insist.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome,
Yeah.
sir.
All right. Great. Thanks.
Sure. So when you give a performance review, Sean,
Mm-hmm.
what do you look for? What do you want to hear?
A
Do you
performance
ask
review,
people,
yeah,
like, what do you think of your performance? Or how do
absolutely.
you do that?
It's the
Okay.
very first thing that I do.
Okay.
The very first part of the conversation is, how do you think this year went? And you let people go. And sometimes, surprisingly enough, they're not prepared with an answer, which is telling, right? It's telling. Like, you should, again, let's get to the theme of passion. I think I did great. I think I did this. I think I did that. Blah blah blah. And you listen. You listen to every word. You do not interrupt. You do not interject. You listen. People need to feel heard. And then once someone feels heard, then you can interject. First of all, positive confirmation. All right, I agree. You did that very well. And you need to be very specific about that. You can't just say, hey, you did a great job. You need to be very specific and say, when you worked on this project and you did it within timeframes and you did it within cost, that really helped our business in this way, and add something personal. And you should be proud of yourself. Now, when you do that and you accentuate the positive, now when you get into the points for someone to work on, they understand there's a point of empathy. They understand that you actually care about them and their career, that you want them to succeed, that no one's coming down on them. So same thing. Now I say, hey, here's some things that we need to work on. And you be specific. Don't say that you're always doing this, or that's never good. You say very specifically, when you worked on this project, you were late in this situation, there was cost controls here. Understood that there was these contingencies in the way, but nonetheless, this is where we ended up. So what can we do to get to that different point, and blah blah. And you have that kind of a conversation. None of these things should be new on a performance review. If you're doing anything right as a manager, you've had this conversation many times. No one's hearing this for the first time in a year-end review, or even a biannual review. So yes, Steve, to answer your question, you absolutely ask someone how they feel it went.
Thank you. And I'm wondering, has everyone been in a performance review?
Yes. Have been.
What would you mind sharing? Like, what's your impression of the person that gave you your review, as far as how it was conducted, how it was delivered, how
I
you
can
were
say
reacting?
something to that. If you don't mind.
Doesn't sound like it's going to be nice. Yeah.
Listen, I'm the type of person, I'm so organized. I know exactly if I'm going to a meeting. That's why I asked you, Steve, right? Is there anything I need to prep before I join
Right.
this? Because I'm that type of person. I don't want to wing it. I want to be prepared. Even if it's like a 15-minute meeting, I want to be prepared. So every time I talk to candidates, I do that. So performance review, oh my gosh, it's going to haunt me like a week before. I'm so prepared. I have my spreadsheet. I have everything that this or the things that I've done. This are the ones that I need improvement on. And this is my pushback if you tell me something like this, because it's like this. So I know my story. I know everything that I have to say. So when it comes to that, I'm just, sometimes there was a time that I had a performance review and I was disappointed because the person who did my performance review, it's almost like, oh, let me see. And then it's almost like looking through the files. Oh yeah, it's you. So let's see. Okay, it's almost like
It's so
just right
impersonal.
there and then.
Yeah.
No preparation
Right.
at all. Like, come on, give me at least half an hour preparation to understand me a little bit more, especially the bigger the company, you know, the worse, right? Because it's like you're almost like a number. So the frustration is like if someone's not prepared, maybe I'm expecting too much or no, but you know, come on, you got to be prepared. Got to know me. How can you give me reviews if you can't like at least let me know, you know me by name and that's it. You know, that's, you know, we're starting off in the wrong foot right there. And then so be prepared, know me, at least spend something, you know, understand me. And then that's when, you know, I like it when Sean mentioned about like let them talk first. Yes. But then hopefully from there, whoever's giving me the performance review will, okay, yeah, I know what you said, or at least pay attention to what I said the first 15 minutes, right? That's one thing too. If someone's not paying attention to, like, come on, should I just walk out of here?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, someone's organized. It's frustrating to me if someone's not prepared to meet with me, because it's like I feel like that performance review isn't, it's not valid, right? It's what's your basis for that performance review? So
You're
did you
so
just
right.
wing it? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Has anyone else gone through anything that's as painful as that?
So I think
I would,
sometimes,
I
please,
just
please go
want to
ahead.
add, oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to add, I think the one thing I hear and I see is like everybody finds it to be very unpleasant and it shouldn't be, but it is
Right.
like people dread it. It's like the dentist or whatever. It's like, oh, and you're going to say this and then you're going to nail me with this. And like, it shouldn't be the first time you're having this conversation, but I've seen a lot of leaders where it's the first time and they'll slip in something that was never an issue that you never got feedback on. And they're like, oh, but this, you know, like a surprise.
Right.
In the
It's like they have an agenda, right?
yes. And like I just think it should be an open dialogue from the very beginning. So I've been working with Steve on the interviewing piece, and I'm thinking the best thing to do is the parallels of tell me about yourself. You want to kind of carry your from the time you have the interview and you land the job, you want to carry that conversation with that new leader throughout the year and check in like, am I, you
Yeah.
know,
No question.
delivering
No
on
question.
things that we
Yeah.
talked about when you hired me. So I'm finding this very interesting because I think I will take that forward and make sure I'm doing a checkpoint the whole year long.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you say,
It's a
Sean?
really good
Yeah.
idea. But you know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's always a good idea. Do not have those conversations for the first time, and it's not supposed to be a gotcha. That is not the intent. It's supposed to be a collaborative effort. You are working together to reach a goal. Me as your manager, you as the employee, we're all working towards the same goal. A review should be collaborative, and feedback, suggestive feedback is not negative. Here's something that I see. Here's the facts around why I see it, and here's what I think we should do to work on it. Doesn't have to be, and aha, that day on Thursday in January, I saw you were half an hour late. You know, like, that's not what this is about. That's not what it's supposed to be about.
And I don't want to derail this whole thing, but I do want to ask a question, like just because having worked at like American Express and a lot of large
Yeah.
corporations, now I work for a fintech, the the grading, the scoring, right? Like someone has to be, so many have to be a G1 and an L1. And so like, no matter how good you do, you're going to get slotted because there's 6 or 5 people in the department and not everyone can be
Yeah.
the top and no one can be the bottom. So that can also be a difficult situation.
It's a very difficult situation, and I've heard people say that there is no curve, and, and that's just not true. There's absolutely a curve. There's a 100%, 1,000% a curve, right? Every organization I've been in, you know, and as Steve said, I've had hundreds of people, and I've had 50 people. In every single one, while it might not be called a curve, if I submit more than X percentage to be at the highest rank, they'll just come back and say it's got to have less. So it ends up being a curve. It ends up being exactly the same as a curve, right? And yeah, sometimes it's frustrating because you perform well, but you're in that middle tier. Here at BlackRock, it's called strongly performed, and 80% of people are within strongly performed sometimes, and it's frustrating. But that's there are nuances within how people are graded, and I think one of the key points to talk about in a performance review in anything is promotion. How do I get promoted? right? And promotion is something that you do together, and it has to be an honest conversation. I can tell you that once you get to the senior level, say you want to get promoted to managing director, there's 2 years of interviews, right? And it's, you know, there's stakeholders and all that stuff. But be upfront with me about what it's going to take to do that, so I can start preparing. If you want to get promoted to run your first team, be upfront about, I would like to run a team. What do you need from me to give me an opportunity to be considered for that, right? And then you go back and do it. But if you don't have the conversation, it won't happen. Managers aren't sitting around, you know, thinking about you. You have to come and say, I think I have what it takes to run this project or to manage this team or to be promoted to this next level. What do you think? And make it be a very specific conversation. If there's specific feedback, well, then you have to not have an ego. You have to listen to that feedback, but at least it's out there and it's actionable items.
Sean, you know, that I'm really glad that you shared that. And I want to go back to Shivaji in a minute because I know you had a question.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when I coach technologists, primarily with JP Morgan, which is one of my coaching clients, the cultures have a lot to do with how people even contribute to their own performance reviews. Like a lot of times I'll ask someone, do you want to be promoted? Say they're an associate and they want to move up to a VP. And almost everyone says yes. And my next question is, well, when you meet with your manager during your performance reviews, how do you handle being considered to be promoted? And 9 times out of 10, they say, oh, I asked my manager, what do I need to do to get promoted? I believe that you have to behave like the person you want to be in the next level in your career. Behavior. If you want to manage a team, you can manage people without officially having them report to you. What do you think about that concept?
That's how I got, yeah, I mean, that's how I got my first promotion. I was in my 20s. I had just come out of the Army, and I started a, you know, there's a technology group, it's performance reporting, and people did not have kind of that ability to talk to a client. There was a very technical background, and I was the one that people came to and just kind of took charge. Well, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. And you can do so in the right way. And very quickly, I was given that first responsibility. I think you have to do it before you get it. So it's a little bit of both, right? I think it involves raising your hand for anything that comes up. One of the things I see from the other end of the table is people coming to me saying, I think I should be promoted. And what have you done above and beyond your normal role, right? Just because you've been there for 10 years doesn't mean that you're acting at that next level. You have to do something at that next level. So it's a little bit of both. I think you have to do it to get it, but you also have to be very clear that you're looking for it. There has to be transparency, and there has to be interaction around, here's where you are doing it and here's where you're falling short. All of those are very clear conversations. And you also get to a level where there's stakeholders involved. Other people other than your manager makes that decision. It's not always you know, particularly at the larger organizations, managers don't just, you know, say, hey, this person's going through or that person's going through. Sometimes there's panels and there's things like that. At BlackRock, I run the promotion panel for associates and vice presidents, and they all have stakeholders. And if you want to make vice president, you have to have at least 4 stakeholders that say something that you are doing above and beyond what you're doing. So it's, you know, then there's a conversation of, to make a certain role, do I need to be managing people? Do I need to be managing a project? Can I make it as an individual contributor? And for the most part, you're going to reach a role, a state in your career where being a good individual contributor that does your job and does it well will not be enough to get that next level. And you have to ask, what else do I need to do? And then you need to, as Steve said, you need to do it proactively as well.
And that's where people like recruiters like Joanna, coaches like Brett, mentors, that's where people can really help guide someone who wants to get a promotion, but they have to go one step at a time, one review at a time, and building their visibility and their awareness within the company. Because people's perception of someone is their reality. It may not be the person's reality of who they are.
Well, stakeholders is a whole topic in itself, and it's a challenging thing, particularly when you get to the point where you need stakeholders to help you get to that next level. You know, to make the director level of BlackRock, the promotion committee actually interviews stakeholders, right? So though you can't just say, yeah, I like so-and-so, and I agree. Like you have a half an hour interview about your interactions with them. So how do you get those stakeholders that are willing to do that for you? Well, it's networking, right? And I know that's kind of an unpleasant word at times, but like, hey, can I grab a cup of coffee? Can I pick your brain on what you've done successfully in your career? And you begin to establish those relationships. It's also going above and beyond. If you're in a support role, like my teams are, and someone from the sales team says, I really need help with this. If I'm a junior person on this team and I jump to and I make that happen, you now have a stakeholder. You now have somebody that'll go to bat for you and say, hey, that person was above and beyond. They didn't just do their job, they did above and beyond.
Would you define a stakeholder as a champion for someone?
I think there's two different things. A champion is somebody that meets with you regularly, promotes you regularly, walks through, it doesn't have to be your manager, but walks through what you need to get to the next level. A stakeholder is more somebody that has worked with you and says, yeah, they're good, they're above and beyond, and I'd be happy to put my name next to it.
Thank you for explaining that. Shibaji, do you have a question?
No, I was going to add a point to in the performance review.
Hmm.
There is one thing that we need to avoid most of the time is the halo effect. Like, in last 1 month, someone has performed really well, or last 1 month of the review, someone has really did something really bad. That should not impact the whole year's performance. And that is the whole reason why it is so important that we touch base in a monthly, maybe quarterly, like periodically with the manager, with the subordinates, to make sure that we have a collective, cumulative, feedback, not just once in a year, right? That's one thing. And the second thing is that in the feedback cycle, if we are not hearing something constructive, instead of everything is coming as negative, right? Well, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, without any context, right? Because ultimately we are working towards a common goal to make the company successful, to make the customers successful, right? So if there is nothing constructive, maybe that is a red flag when you need to rethink your strategy or the association with the particular boss or the subordinate or the company itself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Everything is in balance. Everything has to be. It can't be an hour of someone telling you how great you're doing, and it certainly cannot be an hour of somebody telling you all the things that you did not do. There is a balance, and if you have a proper relationship with your leadership team, this needs to have occurred throughout the year, and it's also just a little bit of common sense. Everything doesn't have to be a formal conversation. Everything doesn't have to be a one-on-one. I know that if I walk outside my office and just walk up to somebody and say, hey, you really did a great job on this, it makes somebody's day, or at least it makes their hour, right? Little pieces of on-the-spot feedback in a positive way really helps boost morale. And, there are, I wouldn't say, tough times, but like there are ebbs and flows in our industries. There's ebbs and flows in our job cycles. And when you are in a down cycle, or there's layoffs, or compensation isn't great, or all that, sometimes establishing the right morale of your group goes a long way. Goes a long way. And that's a shared vision. That's making sure that people are along with for the ride. That's continuous communication about where we are on that ride. And it's also things like, hey, you really did a great job here. That doesn't have to wait for a year interview. You really did a great job here. Appreciate your work on this. It's important stuff.
I'm curious to hear what everybody feels about your own experience. How have you been treated when you're going through these reviews? Like Shibaji said, if you make one mistake, is that going to affect your entire year? That's scary. Anybody?
I mean, sometimes that's the case, right? Because sometimes the manager isn't documenting things, or it gets such tunnel vision of, well, this just happened.
Right.
And you need to zoom out and be more contextual and somewhat data driven also. But I've also had the opposite experience where it's similar to Joanna's. It's just so like, who are you? But also just so reliant on the internal performance management tool and the rankings, and you rated yourself as this, I gave you this, moving on, versus like taking a more personal, holistic approach. it like just becomes so dry and myopic. So there's like two extremes here. There's like the super emotional, I'm going to focus on this one thing that made me really angry or upset, or I'm just going to make it so like fall into line. And did you hit these core things? Is it okay if I ask a question, Steve, of Sean?
Yes, please.
Not to derail us. So Sean, you talked about the rankings and the curve, and I've been in that environment. I'm curious, do you see value in being transparent with the people you manage and saying, like, this is the system, like, sorry,
Yeah.
you did a fantastic job. If I could give you a bonus, I would, but like 80%, unless you walk on water, you're not getting a promotion.
I think it's a personality based thing. My particular personality, absolutely. I think the transparency is so important, and there's a fine line between passing the buck as a leader and saying, "Oh, those guys wouldn't let me give you a review," but being honest and saying, "Hey, I think you did a really good job." Unfortunately, I'm going to paraphrase. You did not. Not everybody walks on water, and therefore you can't get this. And that, sometimes that's just the way it is. When you work at a big company, the reality of what it is to work at the big company has to be transparent. And so, again, I'll use the curve. I don't come out and say, "There's a curve," and blah blah. There's a way to say it. There's only a small handful of people that would be in this particular, ranking. You have to do something that's extremely specific and above and beyond in this particular ranking period to get it. You had a strong year. You did this well, but you don't fall into that category right now. But we really appreciate what you're doing. Yeah, that transparency is key. Flat out saying, nope, there's no curve, doesn't help. Or flat out saying, those guys wouldn't let me rank you, doesn't help. You have to own the decision. But yeah, transparency, it's something I believe in. Yes, that's a good question.
So then how do you deal with, because I've been in that position where
Yeah.
I went to a big company and was just like, but I'm the person that is the exception. I'm always the exception. What happened? How do you coach employees who are used to being like the exception, who aren't anymore?
Great
Yeah,
question.
not everybody's an exception. Right. I mean, I think
My
think
mother
it's
told me I was.
right. Look, it's like sports, right? Not everybody can take every shot. And I think in a large organization, as long as you are transparent that maybe there's 4 or 5 people that are going to get this rating, it is part and parcel for joining a big company. It's just kind of the way it is. And I think some of the bureaucracy around these things is not pleasant to us, but it exists. And being open and honest and transparent and realistic about that bureaucracy it's just part of it.
But it's frustrating. There's something called
Sure.
a forced ranking. Why didn't I get promoted? Well, we couldn't promote everyone that deserved it this year.
But then that goes to the transparency of what does deserved it mean? So, Steve, to your point about doing it before you get it, it also goes to the transparency of what would it take for me to be one of those people that's an exception? And
Yes.
you as a leader need to be able to say, well, you did a really good job. However, there were parts of the organization, you don't name other people, you don't name other names, parts of the organization where we implemented this new system and you need to do something at that level to get an outperform or a strongly outperform or whatever it might be. To be promoted, you need to not just be managing a team, but that team needs to perform X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. And that's what gets you to that level. So it is transparency followed by the reality that, unfortunately, not everybody's going to get that rating.
So it's KPIs, right?
It is, but that implies a perfect world, right? That implies that if you hit those KPIs, you get that rating or that promotion. And sometimes it is not a perfect world.
So I want to take this transparency to a certain level. I'm all, you know me, Steve, and I want to be able to ask this because I have this experience with, I was talking to a candidate I placed last week. He started out as like a junior developer, and then, we stayed in touch, and years passed, and then now he's a manager. And he's like, he was telling me, I'm going to do my first performance review next week. And I'm like, that's great. So I was like, that's amazing. And I'm like, are you excited? Are you prepared? And he's like, no, I don't want to end up in TikTok. And I'm like, what? And so the thing when he told me, he's like, listen, if you see out there, there's the transparency, and we do everything a lot on video. I'm going to do your performance review. And I've seen it, like HR, like saying something like this, and then they end up on TikTok because it was recorded. And we deal with all generations right now in the workforce, right? Those are more in touch with, I'll do everything, and I want everything online. I want everyone to see what's going on with my life. But it's gotten to the point of like, oh my gosh. And he was, it was I think it was a valid concern. So how do you sort of like mention that let's respect that conversation you're having with the other person on video and stuff like that? How do you even say that?
Well, so
like, I'm just afraid I'm going to be on TikTok.
I don't want to date myself, but some of these conversations I've had were long before the days of TikTok or even the internet. So this is a new world for all of us. An example I've seen in today's generation of people coming out of school for first jobs, they talk about compensation openly.
Yeah.
Openly. That was a huge no-no in my generation. You just didn't do that.
Yep.
They literally would turn and be like, my bonus was X, well, mine was Y.
Yeah.
Well, wait,
like what'd you get?
Yeah. So yeah, you just weren't allowed to do that. Or if you did, it was over drinks on that the conversation didn't go any further, right? So it's just a different world. And the TikTok analogy. So let's take the TikTok analogy with the question about stack ranking or force ranking. You have to be careful so you can have transparency without putting yourself or your firm in jeopardy. So instead of saying stack ranking, you say there is a limited number of slots available for this particular rating, and you didn't fall into it. However, you did a really good job. People can interpret that to say stack ranking, but you're not going to be on TikTok and have to go to your HR counterpart and say, why did you admit we have stack ranking, right? So there's a political way to be transparent,
Correct.
but you still need to be transparent. People won't follow you if they know you're just spouting company lines.
Transparency, I think, also depends on the company culture. Some companies actually support a lot of transparency. They actually, foster that culture of being open and transparent. Some companies probably do not, right? There's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of, hush hush kind of, stuff.
Be smart. Yeah.
There, right. One thing I personally believe that being open and transparent, it actually is so much better when it comes to productivity, right? When people have clarity of the thoughts, they are far more productive than when they have a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty going on in their mind. Because all of these things impact us negatively, because we all are emotional beings, right? We are not very rational. So transparency and openness plays a big role. The second thing, when it comes to evolution, a lot of companies today, they focus on two dimensions. So one is the performance and the second is the values. Performance is rather easier to measure, but value is very difficult to measure, right? A lot of people, they are very introvert. They do not literally drum up what they're doing all the time, but they have been demonstrating a lot of values throughout their work. How do we really measure their values? It's a massive, question that I always have. There are many other people who are very extrovert. They know how to really measure things, how to, write things down on the paper in a nice way that looks really great. But how do we treat our people more objectively, right? In terms of values? That's one of the things that I always struggled with, and I always found like it is not done very well in the companies where value is one of the major curve.
Yeah, it's an inexact science, isn't it? Well, I think one of the things, and speaking of introverts, is making sure that you don't have to have a particular personality type to be heard, right? we've all experienced meetings where someone will continuously speak up and others are kind of like not able to get a word in edgewise. And, as a leader, you need to see that and give people that freedom, that open space. So for example, Sam, I think I saw you starting to ask a question, so I'm going to give you an
Yes.
opportunity to do that.
Just come in because
Yeah.
I'm a social media manager and also teach college, mainly juniors and seniors in leadership. And a lot of what we focus on is the values and intentionality. And since I'm one of the few professors in my program that is Indigenous as well, right? Like I have this different approach and I'm looking for those moments and really pushing my students, because if you are afraid to be on TikTok, then that really starts for me as the value alignment. There's some intentionality, there's going to be impact that's might come off the wrong way, and it's just, yeah, it's really interesting. Every week my class is on Tuesdays primarily, like asking them like, what did you see on TikTok? What are the opportunities? What is drawing your attention? And then, again, that starts with the values, it starts with the intentionality. And like, I wish I had met me and other, professors in this particular program when I was younger, right? How much that would shift your life trajectory. So just wanted to add that in because, yeah, TikTok can be harsh sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank
Intentionality
you.
is a great term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a great term.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Sean, you mentioned when you give a performance review
Mhm.
that you're sensitive to someone's nervousness.
Yes. And the interview as well. Mhm.
Would you mind? How do you react to that? Joanna, as a recruiter,
Yeah.
I'm sure Sam, what you do in school, I mean, you experience nerves, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's no doubt.
Well,
I'm not nervous though.
I think nerves can be equated as humanity, right? Of course you're nervous. You're something like an interview or performance review. You're thinking about it beforehand, right? You're talking to your spouse or your parents about like, gee, I've got an interview tomorrow. Like you're nervous about it. It's a big deal, and it's okay to be nervous. And I think that's why it's always a good idea, if the situation allows for it, to spend a couple minutes just talking about something other than work, even if it's the weather or, hey, we just got a foot of snow, how did you dig out of that? Just something to break it into, like, it is human A talking to human B, whether human B is a hiring manager or performance manager or whatnot. Having that conversation to break the ice, showing that you have the ability to work with your nervousness and still have a conversation, I think is key. So yeah, I can tell you as a hiring manager, Steve, I never hold it against anybody, but as a recruiter, coaching people to come in, just tell them to be themselves. Just be yourself.
But Sean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you know this, and I'm sure everyone has experienced this. There are some managers who don't want to make small talk.
Right. Well, small talk is a relative term, right? So
well, the weather is
you got to read,
right?
you got to read the room. You got to read the room.
Right.
So yeah,
right.
you don't go on for 4 minutes about snow when someone's giving you a blank stare. How was your trip in? The little things. And I can say my manager, after about 30 seconds, we're getting down to we're getting down to it. So like, and some hiring managers are going to be the same way. So read the room. If somebody wants you to display your humanity, be able to see that and do so. If someone says within 30 seconds, tell me what you did at your last job. Okay, read that cue. They don't want to have small talk. They don't want to talk about you. They want to talk about what you did at their last job. You adapt to what you're being asked. You answer the question that you're being asked, and then you also make mental notes about this position, right? Including, is this something I want? You now see the person interview has a good chance of being your manager. Who do I want to work for? Right? What is the environment I want to work for? So there's a lot that you can read into an interview. But yeah, oversimplification, read the room. Read what the person's asking you to answer.
Good answer. Shivaji, when you were at EY, what was it like there? Can I ask you?
In EY, it was, we had a very, well-established process, right? So any promotion, any year-end discussion would follow 3 or 4 step process that, and when I was promoted, so basically we had to build a case for that. And like Sean explained, it is not an easy process. You need to have your supporters. You need to have people who are sponsoring your promotion. You need to garner that support by talking to people. It's not just one day thing. People they have worked with, build a relationship with, coming from the clients, coming from your peers, coming from other directors or partners that you have worked with. It's a massive involvement. It's a massive work, and it's a great learning at the same time, because it shows you how to sell yourself to when you want to get a job, when you want to get to the next level, right? Ideally, it is always the same thing, that you need to operate in the next level than just going for it. And who are the people who wants to support that commentary that yes, Shivaji is performing already in the next level?
Thank you. Bernadette, when you were at American Express twice, right? What was it like to get a review and to get the promotions that you secured?
I would always have the conversations with my manager. I want to be the best. What do I have to do to be the best to get the G1 rating and the L1 rating? And I kept that theme going all year long. Because if not, you're going to be a consolation. Like you're going to be like, as a manager going, oh, you know what? They're not going to really mind because they just started 10 months ago. So I'm just going to say, oh, you couldn't get the best rating. I had this conversation yesterday with the hiring leader at my interview, because I was like, now if I join the company, it's at this point, you started your fiscal year in October. I would be joining in February. Is, what's that going to look like when it comes to the time for the bonus and the review, and his answer was that, it would be prorated based on the time in job. But I still think I would need to continue that conversation if I advance with them to say, what's the best rating you can get? What would I need to do to demonstrate that? Because I could just see people getting pushed into a place because like, oh, they'll handle it better. This news is better for them. I'm going to give them a little raise, but I'm going to give them a L3 rating, but they'll accept it because I'll give them a little money. So I think it's a difficult situation for everybody when it's the scale.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, this is the fastest hour in show business. I think we're up. Before we go, first of all, I want to thank you, Sean, and I thank everyone for taking time
Thank you
to
everyone
join
for
us.
contributing. Yeah.
Any last minute questions for Sean Carricker before he gets back to his BlackRock world?
I really enjoyed meeting you, everybody, and I enjoyed the questions and the conversation. I think it was really nice. So thanks for putting us together, Steve.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a great
you.
weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice
Bye.
to meet
Thank you.
Everyone.
Nice to meet everyone again. Bye.
Bye.